The Rules Committee will come to order. We are here for consideration of H.R. 2112, the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration Related Agencies Appropriations Act. We're happy to welcome the chairman and ranking members of the subcommittee, Chairman Kingston, and my California colleague, Mr. Farr. Gentlemen, nice to see you. Hope you had a good week. And let me say that without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Mr. Chairman, it's a great pleasure to be here. Mr. Farr and I have had 11 hearings on the Ag Appropriations Committee. We're sort of a reflection of the Ryan budget and our 302B allocation. Therefore, it's a reduction of $2.7 billion from the FY 2011 level, and it's $5 billion below the President's request. It comes in at $17.25 billion. But ironically, and I was just saying this to Mrs. Fox, the bill's still a net increase because of the mandatory spending in there. That the SNAP program, food stamps, is up $5.6 billion, and school lunch is up about $1.5 billion. Only to emphasize that in our committee, we're only in charge of discretionary money and not mandatory money. And so I don't need to lecture anybody in here about it, but until we get into entitlement reform, we're going to continue to whack away at the discretionary portion of the budget and still not necessarily reduce spending. So the bill reflects the 302B allocation, and we've worked hard to get here. It still helps us fulfill all the missions of agriculture. And I yield.
Well, thank you. I have a little bit more to say, Mr. Chairman and ranking members and Mr. McGovern and other members of the committee. This is my first appearance before the Rules Committee as a ranking member, and I'm glad to have the opportunity of my close friend and colleague from California, Mr. Dreyer, and my Codell buddy. I want to hear about his Codell. But I came today as a ranking member to ask you to provide for an open rule for consideration of the FY12 Agricultural, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration related agencies. I know that we're in tough budget times, but even in tough budget times, people have to eat. In my opinion, this bill makes it hard to do that. The allocation for 2012 Agricultural Appropriations Bill, as approved by the full committee, is $17.25 billion. This is $5 billion, or 23% less than the President requested. This is $2.9 billion, or 14% below what we enacted last year. This is 26% below what we enacted in 2010. It is even below the level we enacted in 2008. With the allocation that Chairman Kingston was given, I do not envy the position he was placed in to make these drastic cuts. Will affect every heart of farm country, and I don't appreciate the effort we have to make I do appreciate the effort we have to make to invest in very limited resources wisely and cost effectively. In tough budget times, everyone has to tighten their belts. We all know that. But I want to point out that it doesn't matter if you are a specialty crop producer in California or a cotton or peanut producer in Georgia. If the resources are not available to deliver the programs, then the effects will be felt both by the producer and consumer in urban and rural areas. And I know that my good friend, Mr. Kingston, did the best he could, producing a bill with a budget allocation that he was given. But agriculture is about feeding people. It's about making sure people have the production capabilities and enough food to go around domestically and internationally. The bill almost makes it difficult, if not impossible, especially where nursing mothers and infant babies are concerned, because the WIC budget gets whacked. The bill calls into question the United States' commitment to international neighbors who have hungry and malnourished people that depend on our assistance to starve off mass starvation because of the food for peace is chopped. I think there comes a point in budget exercise when you starve the program so much that it can't function. I hear that's where this bill, I fear that that is where this bill is going with several of the funding levels in this bill, such as implementing the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Dodd-Frank Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The United States is the greatest agricultural producer in the world. We produce more, and we produce it more effectively than any other country. But this bill will undermine the very resources that support our agricultural supremacy. I feel it is important to use this bill to strengthen our rural economy by investing in precious federal resources in expanding markets for agricultural products and support international economic development, in developing alternative markets for agricultural products, in providing financing needed to help expand job opportunities and improve housing, utilities, and infrastructure in rural America, in enhancing food safety, and in improving nutrition and health by providing food assistance and nutrition education and promotion. Mr. Chairman, as we move through this bill, the process, again, I'm asking for an open rule so that every member of the House can have the opportunity to reshape this bill as best as possible. I thank you for consideration.
Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for being here, and let me say that I strongly support the statement the gentleman has made. I'm going to recommend to the committee that we do make an order, an open rule. As Chairman Kingston and I have discussed, there are items in here that the authorizing committees have raised concerns about as it relates to the FDA, cotton, and others. Those I'm going to recommend that they be exposed because of the disagreement that exists there. And what I'm going to recommend is that we have an open amendment process and provide the necessary protection for the underlying bill itself that is the work product of your committee. But I'm going to discourage the committee from making an order any waivers beyond that because, again, your request, Sam, for an open rule is what I'm planning to support here, and I hope very much that the committee will agree with that. Mr. Kingston. Excuse me, Mr. Kingston. Mr. Sessions, sorry. Looking at Jack here.
The other guy from Georgia, right?
Yeah, exactly. Y'all talk alike.
Yeah, I know we do. We also look alike, too. Jack, I think you're a handsome guy. I want to thank both of you for being here today. And Chairman Kingston, I'm not surprised when you said that there would be a net increase because of mandatory spending. We argued vehemently with our friends, the President of the United States, when he brought forth his massive spending programs, his stimulus. We're getting ready to celebrate 1 year worth of that great summer where we had the jobs, the summer of jobs, which didn't occur. We now have 9.1% unemployment. We have, even though Texas has created over the last year 1/3 of all the states in the entire country, we still have 9% unemployment in Texas. In the last 12 months, unemployment compensation has exceeded corporate revenue from corporate taxes in this country. We're in a jobs crisis. We're in an economics crisis. We're with the President of the United States that cannot figure this out. He is more interested in his reelection than he is doing the right thing for the American people for jobs. It is shocking that we continue to have the unemployment numbers for the length of time that we have. We see this most noticeably in people who are unemployed and still do need, as Mr. Farr said, need the ability to eat. I'm so proud that I live in the United States of America, but we've got to do something about this. I believe your bill, your hard work that both of you have worked on, including those 11 hearings, has revealed a lot about the soft underbelly that we have in this country about how quickly things can change and the dramatic need of families, disabled people, veterans who have come back who are without jobs, unemployment at record levels for longer period of time. And this Congress is going to speak through, and I support the chairman with an open rule. But I believe we still have a demand upon us to do the right thing and not to kick the can further down the road because we're there. We are at the end of the road, and things can get dramatically worse if we do not work for jobs bills, and competitiveness in this country. And so you are at the forefront of talking about and understanding the needs of this country, and yet not building a bigger government in order to get it done. So I thank you. I know that the awesome responsibility has been on you for a number of months. I've watched you as you walk and talk and think and build a consensus around what we need to do, and I'm very proud of your product. And I want to thank both of you for being here. I yield back.
Well, thank you. And, from my point of view, it doesn't matter whether this is an open rule or a super duper open rule or a quadruple bypass rule. I don't care what kind of rule it is. The bottom line is that this allocation is lousy. And what's really tragic, amongst all the appropriations bills that we're going to be dealing with, in this bill are programs that actually feed people here in the United States and around the world. And as it now stands, with the cuts in WIC, it's estimated conservatively that between 200,000 and 350,000 low-income mothers and young children would be cut from the program, depending on food prices. Depending on food prices, and that's a conservative estimate. The Community Supplemental Food Program cut by 22% from current funding levels, which means that approximately 604,000 low-income people each month, which means that at least 130,000 low-income seniors would lose nutritious food packages. International food aid, Food for Peace, is slashed dramatically. McGovern-Dole School Feeding Program, which is something that's near and dear to my heart, received a $19 million cut. These cuts would end school meals for nearly 500,000 children in the world's poorest countries. You know, I get it that we need to get serious about deficit reduction and about balancing the budget, but balancing it on the backs of the most helpless people in this country and in this world is the wrong way to do it. You know, these programs are there, you know, for the most needy in our country, and I'm going to disagree with Mr. Dreyer on the you know, on the issue of you know, of giving waivers here. I think if I'm not correct, Mr. Lauro offered an amendment in committee which took money from this Brazilian cotton farm program, this overseas subsidy, and put it toward WIC. And I'm curious, Mr. Kingston, would you be for protecting that so that someone couldn't have a point of order and take that money out of WIC?
Actually, and I'll ask as much as I'll answer, but it's my understanding that that amendment portion that increases WIC $147 million is protected, but the offset is not protected, and what we need to do is find another offset, because the offset portion is actually authorizing, but the increase is not. So as I understand it, we would be able to increase WIC $147 million, but we just have to find another offset, and that's what we are trying to do.
But the problem is, you know, where you find an offset within the allocation that you've been given, and you know, and I think someone like me who, you know, would like to see, you know, an increase in Food for Peace, an increase in McGovern-Dole, an increase in WIC, an increase in some of these domestic nutrition programs, there's really no place for me to find an offset other than taking it from one good program that feeds hungry people, you know, and transferring it to another. And, you know, and I realize that, you know, we deemed the Ryan budget passed and we're going by those allocations, but my problem is I don't quite understand how we arrive at these allocations. I mean, it seems to me that if you want to do this thoughtfully, we need to go through program by program, find out what works. There's some programs that we don't need. Let's get rid of them. There's some programs, quite frankly, we might need to add to, and we get a better result. I'll tell you from, you know, turning our backs on some of the neediest people in our country doesn't mean they go away. It creates other problems, increased health care costs, you know, I mean, increased crime, lack of productivity, kids who can't focus in school in terms of education. And internationally, I'll just tell you that, you know, those protests in Egypt, a lot of them were about, they were food riots. A lot of them were about asking for food, not just about asking for freedom. And when we cut programs, you know, that literally take meals away from 500,000 children, that's significant. And I'll tell you, I mean, Secretary Gates, I wish I had the quote here, made a comment that some of these programs, you know, do more to enhance our national security than all these, you know, military exports, you know, that we're engaged in all over the world, or all these troop deployments that we have. I mean, this is the best of America. And these kind of arbitrary allocations that don't seem to take into account the reality out there. And I understand, you know, we need to, you know, find savings, but it's so troubling to me, you know, that one of the first things that was done, and the President went along with this, and I wish he didn't, was extend the tax cuts for the wealthiest people in this country. Donald Trump is protected. And here we are with a bill that, that quite frankly, I would characterize it as a pro-hunger bill. And, and I get it that, you have to operate within your allocation, but you voted for this budget to begin with. And as far as mandatory spending on food stamps, the SNAP program, the problem, I mean, it's a program that's run pretty efficiently. The problem is there are a lot of people that are falling into a category, and it's not just homeless people or people who don't have jobs. There are people with jobs that are underemployed that are falling into categories where they qualify for the SNAP program. And I hope we're not going down the road where we're going to start disqualifying people from being able to have access to resources that can put hopefully nutritious food, but food on the table. So to me, it doesn't matter what kind of rule you give this, because anything I want to improve, it means I have to take it away from something that is vitally important. I can't go after, the subsidies for the Brazilian cotton farmers, notwithstanding the fact that Brazil is experiencing a boom in its economy and they can take care of their own subsidies. We can't touch that because we're not going to protect it. Can't go after subsidies for big, agribusinesses. But I mean, I don't care how you look at this. People are going to suffer, and it just doesn't seem right to me that we're balancing the budgets on the backs of the people who need help the most. Most of these people who are on these programs, they don't want to be on these programs. They're on these programs because they don't have a job. And I just don't think it's right to turn our backs on the most vulnerable. And we could do whatever we want to do in terms of the rule. I really don't care because it doesn't matter. This allocation is lousy, and I'm really troubled, deeply troubled that we're moving in this direction. Maybe the Senate can rescue us. I don't know, but I hope so.
Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in the comments from my colleague from Massachusetts, and I'm assuming that you're not too happy about the president subsidizing Brazil so they could drill for oil and then sell it back for us and then deny us our opportunity to drill for our own oil. I want to thank the two gentlemen for coming today. I think that Mr. Kingston mentioned that I asked him earlier, but there was a lot of chatter going on when you answered my question, does this go far enough in terms of our reining in our dangerous situation with our debt and our deficit?
Well, what most people in Congress don't appreciate is that when we do the agriculture bill on the floor, that about 80% of it is mandatory spending. And so although we have decreased the discretionary spending about 14%, because of mandatory automatic pilot increases, the bill still has a net increase. Food stamps goes up $5.6 billion and school lunch about $1.5 billion. We've cut spending $2.7 billion. So there's still, now those programs are still adjusted too. The net increase is about $282 million. So we can't truly say this bill has come in less. The discretionary portion certainly has, but the mandatory portion makes up for it.
Well, I thank you for the comment. We do need to continually, I think, help educate people about the difference in mandatory spending and discretionary spending, because it is those programs that are on autopilot that are creating the problems for us in terms of our spending. And I did want to ask you a question, if I could. Mr. Farr was decrying the cuts that were made in this bill, but could you remember the amounts that the increases in the ag appropriations when the Democrats took over the Congress in January of 2007? As I recall, in those 4 years, there were some significant increases in the spending in this category. Mr. Kingston, do you know the amounts?
If you
Or the
could,
percentages?
let me see if we have that information with us. Yeah, it did go to about 17 up to 23 billion on the discretionary portion, and so we're pulling it back to
So
that level.
in 4 years, under the control of the Democrats in the Congress, the spending in the agriculture appropriations went from 17 billion to 23 billion? Is that what I heard you say?
Approximately.
So when you decry the cuts, Mr. Farr, as Mr. Kingston has said, we're really taking it back to before the time that all these increases had been made.
Ms. Fox, this committee, this bill, is about poverty in America. This is where we feed people. We feed women and infants and children. We feed people that are on food stamps. We feed people that, including some of our military families who can't make it with the pay that they're given. We feed the elderly with programs like Meals on Wheels. I mean, the poverty in America is in the ag department. And frankly, we have a lot of poverty in America with unemployment. And, you know, Mr. Sessions talked about unemployment. It's 15 to 22% in my district. And I also represent some of the wealthiest people in the United States. And you know what? I haven't had one person in there. In fact, I've had several come up and say, please raise my taxes. You're only looking at half the jar half full. You cannot balance just on the back of cut, squeeze, and trim. You've got to look at the revenue sources. That's the only way you're going to have a balanced budget in America. And by ignoring the fact that you're protecting all the protections that are in the tax loopholes for the wealthiest entities in this country is just wrong. So yes, you're going to end up having a lot of demands on these programs. As Mr. Kingston's absolutely right. There is a big cost to this bill. It's a big cost because we're dealing with poverty in America, and we've got to face it. And we haven't solved that problem yet.
Well, Mr. Farr, it's always, you say the glass is half empty, but how about if we talk about some other statistics? Since when I can remember very distinctly that when the Democrats took over the Congress in January 2007, that's when our unemployment rate started going up. Up until that point, we had about a 5% unemployment rate. Suddenly, unemployment started going up. Since this, I won't yield, thank you, not at this time. Since this president took office, we've lost 2.5 million jobs. That's an average of 3,044 jobs lost every day. It seems to me you have to look at why the poverty level is up. It's because of the failed policies of the Democratic Congress and the Democratic administration. You're asking us to continue to spend money on failed policies. And I think it's one thing to come in here and say...
Feeding the poor is a failed policy?
I'm sorry?
Feeding the poor is a failed policy?
No. My comment is we have a failed policy that creates the poor. It is your all's policy that has created so many poor people. We had a 5% unemployment rate when you took over the Congress in January of 2007. Now we've had an average of almost 9% since this president became president. So you had 2 years of a Democratic administration and 2 years of a Congress controlled by the Democrats. And that's when our poverty rate went up. That's when people went on food stamps. And you want us to continue the policies that have failed.
I want you to pay for your wars, not put them on credit cards as you did under the Bush administration. I want you to pay for the Medicare Part D program. You put that into bankruptcy through just subsidizing the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, let's have balance. This is what we're all talking about.
Mr. Farr,
we're not going to have we're not going to find solutions to these problems until, yes, we're willing to cut, squeeze, and trim programs too. But let's do it on fairness, and let's cut, squeeze, and trim those abuses in the tax code.
Mr. Farr, you all were in charge of the Congress for 4 years. If you had wanted to make Medicare pay for itself, Medicare Part D, you could certainly have done that. You only bring that up when you're not in control. You never bring it up when you're in control.
Well, maybe we'll be back in control and can bring it up.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make one other comment, if I could, and that is that there's a family here visiting us tonight from North Carolina, the Lewin family, and they happen to be in the food business. And I think they probably will be getting quite a good lesson from being here tonight in the Rules Committee, as well as being in the gallery when we vote. And Mr. McGovern, I yield.
Yeah, thank you for yielding. I just want to plead with everybody on this committee to kind of take the politics out of this issue for a second. I mean, you believe the economy's in a ditch because of one reason. I believe it's in a ditch because of other circumstances. Doesn't make any difference. The bottom line is that we have a lot of people in this country who are struggling. And what this bill is about whether we help them. Doesn't matter whose fault it is that we got here. The fact is we're here. And there are millions of people in this country who are hungry. There is not a community in the United States of America that is hunger-free. And programs like WIC work. And, and programs like the Commodity Supplemental Food Program works. The Emergency Food Assistance Program works. The Hunger-Free Communities Grants work. Food for Peace works. The McGovern-Dole School Feeding Program works. So, let's just for a second, take the politics out of this. It's not about blaming why we got here. The fact is that there are millions of people who need our help. And my problem with this bill is that the allocation is so low and so below what is needed that there are going to be millions of people in this country and around the world who are going to fall through the cracks. So that's my objection. So let's not get into the, who did this and who did that. I'm just simply saying that we got to figure out a way to help these people, whether we're Democrats or Republicans. And that's my only point. Thank you, Barry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kingston?
Yes, if I could have a minute, I wanted to respond a little bit to Ms. McGovern and say that, one of the things I'm concerned about also is the exact same thing you are, to make sure that at the end of the day, that when I put my head on the pillow, that I haven't, pulled the rug out from under some child. And so I asked the staff to look into it. Well, really, what happens to children at certain levels in America? And here's some of the things I found. You're probably already familiar with it. But if you're 3 years old in America, there are 12 federal feeding programs. If you're 10 years old, there's 9. If you're 65-year-old, there are 5. And there is overlap. You have school breakfast, you have school lunch programs, you have to have after school snack programs.
That's not overlap. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner are separate.
And you also have food stamps for the parents, or WIC, depending on the age of the child. And one of the questions, maybe where Democrats and Republicans could get together, is that if we agree that we're going to feed people 3 meals a day, maybe we should say, let's make sure it is 3 meals a day, but not the 4th and the 5th meal. And I would suggest to you that there is additional meals beyond the basic 3 meals, as well as snacks out there. I also want to mention to you somebody who's gone to Guatemala to see the feeding programs, Ethiopia, Senegal, Rwanda. And I always like to go on these things, as I know you do, and I don't stop till I see the plate in the child's hand. And so you get way off the beaten path, which makes it even more rewarding. We actually looked at an amendment, and we've offered it to your committee, that would allow in food aid some of the money in developmental food aid to be transferred to emergency food aid, so that if there is a disaster that is unanticipated, there would be enough to cover it. Now, unfortunately, that is authorizing, and we were hoping that maybe we could get everybody on board with it, but I understand.
But that's also robbing Peter to pay Paul. You'd be taking away monies from programs that deal with chronic hunger issues, and then you would be transferring that into emergency food aid. So you're not, I guess this administration, to its credit, is trying to come up with a holistic approach to global hunger, and I hope they come up with one toward domestic hunger.
And we're pledging to work with them, and I'm not interrupting you, but it's Mrs. Fox's time.
thank you.
So,
No,
but
I just
we will work with the administration and work with you on it too, because it is something that I share with you. But there is that balance. When you feed a child overseas, you're borrowing it from a child in America.
Well,
Because every dollar we spend, 40 cents is borrowed, and you borrow it from the future generation.
I
So-
look at it differently. I look at it, that you're investing in the security of the United States of America. I'm going to tell you one story, and I was in Colombia with the former Ambassador Ann Patterson. We saw McGovern Dole school feeding program. We were in an internally displaced persons community, one of the worst slums I've ever seen. And a young mother came up to the ambassador and she said, "I want to thank the people of the United States for this program, because my son is 11 years old, and I don't have the means to be able to put any food in his mouth. There are days that he goes without food. And now you have come up with a program to invest in school feeding. My son is now in school, and he's being fed." And the reason why it's important is because every day in this community, one of the armed actors comes through.
And-
One day it's a FARC guerrilla, and it's a paramilitary.
Can you imagine when we
And
pass the
she said-
Colombia
she
Free
said-
Trade
but
Agreement,
she's-
how
well,
well off
wait,
that kid will
and
be?
she-
He will have a
and-
job.
yeah, well, and
He
she
will
said-
have a
she said-
job.
She said to me that because of the United States of America, her son doesn't have to join one of the armed actors. That's an investment in our
I
security.
yield back.
That the statement of administration policy be included in the record. Two paragraphs from it, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read. One, the administration strongly objects to the level of funding provided for nutrition programs that are critical to the health of nutritionally at-risk women, infants, children, and elderly adults. The proposed funding levels would lead to hundreds of thousands of participants being cut from the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children in the community supplement food program and reduce federal support for food banks. These cuts would undermine efforts to prevent hunger and support sound nutrition for some of the most vulnerable members of our society. My question to you, Chairman Kingston and Ranking Member Farr, is do you agree or disagree with the statement, not your responsibilities, which I have great respect for you all undertaking to do what you think you can within the budgetary proposals. But what is your take on the administration's position in that paragraph? Either or both.
Well, thank you for asking. This allocation is 23% below what the president asked for. That's a big bite. And you can't, I think they're very aware of what the problems are created by the high unemployment and the need to feed people. And obviously, they don't think we're going to make it with this allocation.
Yes,
Mr. Hayes, I want to make a couple points. Number one, the USDA data shows a drop of 300,000 participants between February 2010 and February 2011. The participation level is still at 8.7 million people, which is funded in this allocation. But if there is an uptick in it, there are 3 contingency funds that we could go to. And so I do not believe it's going to pull the rug out from under anybody. But I also wanted to point out something about the difficult reality that we're in. The Ryan budget is the only budget that has passed either body. The president's budget, as you know, failed in the Senate 97-0. And wasn't even considered over here. And so while I understand where the president's heart may be, but part of his job as leadership would be to come back and have a budget that is passable, or to say, okay, let's sit down and jee-haw around and figure out what we can do. We're all frustrated with the federal budget on a lot of the spending that isn't cut, that seems to be protected from one camp or the other. So I'm hoping that maybe he'll come back to the table.
well, I'm not impressed with political artifice in the U.S. Senate. Matter of fact, I'm not impressed very much with anything that the U.S. Senate does, and that's a fact. for most of us around here. If they did what either Democrats or Republicans requested, it would seem to me that we would be further down the road toward trying to address some of the significant problems that this country has. I made a modest request of $750,000 under the Animal and Plant Inspection Service for honeybee health surveillance activities. And I don't know whether either of you are aware, but for the last 6 years, I have been tracking the particular problem having to do with pollinators. And the reason that I feel so very strongly about it is without the pollinators, we're likely to be without food. Maybe my little request wasn't a big thing, but I have a prediction for you. If we at the current rate do not do something about the bee problem in America, and jokes aside, we're going to find ourselves about a decade down the road with some particularly significant problems. Now, you, I believe, Mr. Kingston, and maybe Mr. Farr, assisted in an earlier request that I made, and I'm not quarreling about this cut. I just make a prediction for you that if you ain't got no bees, you ain't going to have no food. And that's problematical, and it's something that's out there. The second paragraph.
And I wanted to say real quickly, we are very interested in colony collapse disorder and the problems that they're having. And so I will go back within the rules of earmarks and so forth and make sure that that research is not pushed aside.
Yeah, I understand, and I deeply appreciate that. The second paragraph in the administration's statement is they're concerned with the funding provided in the bill for USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service. And I won't read the whole paragraph in the interest of time, but the simple fact of the matter is that we are witnessing overseas an E. coli outbreak ostensibly placed at the methodologies of getting bean sprouts to the public. They think, according to what I read, it happened in Germany and then elsewhere, and people have died. We've had outbreaks in America, and I guess maybe I'm warped in my thinking. I start with wanting to protect children and old people, and then I feel very strongly about all of us going to places where we wind up with foodborne illnesses. And for the life of me, if I was going to be cutting something, I would, for example, Mr. Chairman, you all let animal welfare, wildlife have additional money. And it wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to have at least put back into some of these kind of programs. So your unevenness in the cutting and choosing winners and losers is what bothers me. I don't think the wildlife has any greater advocate than I. But at the same time, if I'm comparing that to women, infants, and children, then the money for the wildlife, I just have to run the risk. And on food safety, I don't want us running any risk. I don't want us cutting any people. They need more people. They don't need less people. Your reaction?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Do you want me to
Yes,
respond? Sir. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say something. Number one, I'm watching the situation in Europe very closely. I believe right now 3,100 people have been sickened, and 31 have also died. It's very serious. They don't know if they thought it was cucumbers. Now they're saying it's bean sprouts. Now they're saying they don't know. We do need to watch it closely. But I also wanted to say one of the things that a foodborne illness does is gets lots of headline and lots of attention. We all need to be very, very concerned about it. But at the same time, according to the CDC, and I've asked them about these numbers over and over again, and they always confirm them, but in America, 48 million foodborne illnesses are reported every year. It's a huge number, 48 million. 128,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths. Big numbers, and we're all very concerned about it. But if you do step back and look at the math, you have 307 million Americans eating 3 meals a day. That's 980 121 million meals eaten each day in America, times 365 days a year, that's 336 billion meals a year. And if you do the math on that, our food supply is 99.99% safe. And it's not because of the USDA and it's not because of the FDA, it's because of the private sector, because the private sector doesn't want to poison their customers because they won't come back. So they have to have, and I know about this because I used to be in the product liability insurance business, they have an extremely high standard of food safety themselves. And so if the USDA's funding level isn't as aggressive, or the FDA particularly isn't as aggressive as they want it to be, it doesn't mean that there's any abandonment in the high standard of food safety. It's just that it's not controlled by the federal government, which is bothersome to a lot of people. I understand that. But there's still a mechanism out there that addresses and worries about food safety each and every day. And the gentleman knows well that the great orange juice producers in Florida, just like the ones in California, are very concerned about their own food safety and their own customers and the seafood that they bring in on the Florida shoreline and so forth. And so, you know, I don't want to endanger American people either. But on this program, also I want to say that in terms of the food safety inspection, they're at $973 million. They do have lots of new processes that change them from visual inspection to microbial inspection. It's more effective and it's less expensive, and they can do more with less money now. So it's something that this committee has to worry about food safety every single day because it is one of our major issues.
Mr. Forrest,
This is the only.
bid here.
Well, first of all, on the pollinators, I share your concerns. I'm a hobbyist flower gardener and fruit grower, and I have 3 beehives on my property just because the pollination is absolutely essential to get the fruit. You're right, and I'll do what we can to address your issue. On the food safety issue, this is the only committee in Congress where you have jurisdiction financially over FDA and USDA. We've had a big fight about, and we passed the Dingell and other bill last year on food safety, which essentially gives the authority to FDA. What we do in USDA is we do animals, poultry, livestock, poultry, and eggs. But all the other food safety is essentially in FDA. And Mr. Kingston's absolutely right that the responsibility on that is primarily on the private sector to grow it right and get it right, and to put we're sort of reactors if there's any illness in food. It gets reported through the CDC, and then reactions taken for recall and so on. So there is a lot of emphasis put. I think that the problem is, you know, it's a constantly changing field because of the biology of foodborne illnesses can transfer over political boundaries. But we need to keep our diligence up, both in FDA and USDA, and hopefully the new food safety bill will enhance better growing opportunities and better inspection opportunities.
Right. Gentlemen, I work with and have before coming to Congress, one of them, 2 food pantry organizations in the county that I'm privileged to serve. Both of them have had an increase in the number of persons making requests for food, and at the very same time have had a decrease in contributions. Do you all experience the same thing in your communities? I mean, you know, when I go there and I see the line, and when I make my personal contributions, and I do to one of them $100 a month, and I recently have started sending $200 when I can because of what I've seen. But the giving is down, and the requests are more. And I heard my colleague from North Carolina said, who caused it? I don't know who caused it, but what I know is what I see, and that's hungry people. And it's problematical. Do you all have food shelters, food pantries, or those kind of things in your districts?
We do, and Second Harvest Food Bank being probably the primary one, although there are others. The Catholic Church has one, and They do a good job. One of the things this bill does, and it was a bipartisan effort led by Mr. Petri, and it would allow schools to transfer unused food to food banks without the red tape that's prohibiting them from doing it right now. And so, I'm not going to tell you that's going to fill in the gaps that you might be having in Miami, but there are things in this bill that tries to increase that relationship.
Well, I thank you.
It's expanding exponentially, and I was in a food bank last time, 2 weeks ago home, and told the story of a woman coming through the line, and people were asking, saying, "You look very familiar," and she said, "That's because I was on your side of the line last year, but I've run out of money." So, yeah, it's shameful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Mr. Farr starting out his testimony by saying he thought Chairman Kingston did the very best he could with what he had to work with. These are tough times. I hear Mr. McGovern say that he gets it, and we all need to get serious about balancing the budget. I'm not sure when that starts. We hadn't had that many opportunities to get serious about it, and this is a serious proposal that you've brought, Mr. Kingston, and I don't envy you having to go through line by line and make those choices. But I don't know what the other choices are. As you say, there's only one budget on Capitol Hill that's passed either body, despite a series of votes to do that. I would certainly line up shoulder to shoulder with you to get your hands around that 80% of mandatory spending, because as Mr. McGovern alluded to, when the pie is so small, it's tougher to make those choices, tougher to sort those things out, tougher to provide that oversight, tougher to do all of those things that I think our constituency calls on us to do. I tell folks in this committee regularly, if they don't like corporate welfare, they don't like tax breaks for oil companies, they don't like giveaways in the tax code, boy, I've got a bill for them, because H.R. 25, the fair tax, as you know, coming out of Georgia, is the only bill on Capitol Hill that abolishes every single giveaway and subsidy that exists in the program. Goes after the ethanol subsidies, too, which might speak to some of those rising costs of food across the country. But is there a bill out there that would allow you more control over those mandatory spending programs?
For some reason, and I'm not sure why, well, the farm bills are done on a 5-year basis, and maybe some of the programs in the farm bill should be reviewed more carefully on a 2 or 3 year basis. Farmers have to make planting decisions, and they need stability in some of these programs. But perhaps these can be looked at. As you know, a lot of the amendments that will be offered on the floor this week really are going after the farm bill mandatory type programs. Some will pass, some won't. We'll have to, or at least many of us will have to oppose them, even if we agree with them philosophically. But it's always, you have to wait for that 5th year, or the 6th year in this case, till the farm bill's reauthorized.
Coming out of Georgia, I look at the kind of reductions you were working with, $2 billion from 2011 appropriations. We're not having to do that in Georgia. Georgia was able to come through, increase some revenues, grow jobs a little bit, and end up with an $18 billion budget again this time around. And I thinking about how we got here and who caused it, I am concerned about those things, but I'm more concerned about how we're solving it. The only war that we've been fighting longer than we've been fighting the war in Afghanistan is the war on poverty. And the only war we spent more money on time after time after time. And I don't know that we're winning that war. But I know this, and I'll tell you, since folks are telling stories here in the Rules Committee today, I happen to have just gotten back from Afghanistan. Mr. Nugent and I were there last week, my first trip as a freshman. And I'm sorry our friends from North Carolina left. We were down in Marja with a group of Marines from Camp Lejeune. And we went out to see a school. It was a street you couldn't walk down a year ago. Could not walk down the street a year ago for fear of being killed. And we're walking around without body armor out there today. No helmets, just walking with the kids down the street to a new school that we'd put together, thinking about how bread may solve more conflicts than bullets, going after the hearts and minds of the kids. And the school teacher came up and through a series of translations shared that he wasn't getting paid. That he used to get paid. Used to be that the Marines had control of that entire sector and they would take care of everything, and so they would come out and they would pay the headmaster of the school. But recently, we transferred those payments, and now USAID controls it all, and they send it all in a giant check to the Afghan government in Kabul, and that money works its way down to all those good places that it's supposed to go to do all those good things it's supposed to do, except the headmaster's not getting paid, hadn't gotten paid, doesn't have any idea when he's going to get paid. And the USAID representative who was with us didn't have anything to offer about how he was going to get paid, but he was sure it was going to get taken care of because there was a big federal program that does that. When you're having to make these challenging decisions, is there anything that you do that impacts what we can and can't do at a Georgia level to take care of our neighbors? Is there anything that you do in this bill that prevents me and the community of Lawrenceville from taking care of my neighbors? Anything at all?
Well, often the bureaucracy with good intentions throws too many regulations on businesses, and they can't create new jobs, they can't expand. And one of the most difficult things in America today is to start your own business. And I don't think USDA has the franchise on that. I think there's a lot of programs that are, a lot of federal agencies that do that. One of the things, though, that Mr. Farr and the other committee members and I always do is when there is a problem back home on the farm, so to speak, or in a hospital with the FDA or whatever, you try to run it through the pipeline, making phone calls and say, can we break the logjam? Can we make it a little bit easier for this farmer, this doctor, this hospital, this pharmacy, whatever? And, a lot of times in that process, you find out there is something flawed in the bureaucracy, which Democrats and Republicans can agree on getting done together. And so, I think that the key to you and your story is that you were in Afghanistan and you got to hear the story directly from the person. And I think that's why it's all very important for all of us to be all over the place in terms of engagement with our constituency and the government.
Well, I want you to know how proud I am of seeing this bill come across. Again, you come from an agricultural state. You come from a state with higher unemployment than the national average. And so these aren't frivolous decisions you're making. These are tough decisions that you're making. But you also come from a state that I believe is willing to step up and fill those gaps, a state that doesn't say, what can the federal government do for me because I can't do for it myself, but just says, I'm not going to fill those gaps. If the feds are going to give me free money, I will take that free money. I'm not foolish. But in the absence of those dollars, I believe in our community, and I hope in Mr. McGovern's community, I hope in Mr. Farr's community, neighbors will step up again, communities will step up again, and to the degree that there are gaps there, as you say, we all have to decide how we're going to lay our head on the pillow at night and rest. And I would hope that absolutely no one here believes that anyone's standard for that is any lower than others. I'd be happy to yield, gentlemen.
Tell the gentleman, neighbors are stepping up. And faith-based organizations are stepping up. Churches and synagogues and mosques are stepping up. But it's not enough. And any of the faith-based leaders from any faith that exists in this country will tell you that they're working overtime trying to address this issue. But they need some help.
Absolutely they are. And absolutely they need some help, and absolutely those contributions are down, and we can do that. As Mr. Kingston alluded to earlier, dollars only come from one place. In this country, and that's the American people. And the American people are either going to do it themselves today, or they're going to pay the government to do it on their behalf today, which I think has some morality implications, or we're going to borrow from the next generation of kids to pay for this generation of kids. It's not easy, and it would have been easier 10 years ago, and it would have been easier 5 years ago, but now we've got to deal with it today, and it would have been easy to punt, Mr. Kingston, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate not just you're getting the job done, but you're being able to find some bipartisan successes there to solve some things that might not have been easy to solve.
Or Mr. Woodall, let me just, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I lived in a culture of poverty. I lived in an area where they didn't have running water, didn't have lights, didn't have schools, didn't have health centers. What you saw is that poverty exists when you don't have access, when you don't have a chance to get an education, when you don't have a chance to go and treat a medical injury, whether you were born with it or incur it, and you don't have a safe place to sleep. If you don't have those, you don't have a chance. you're never going to have a chance. If you think about it, schools, healthcare centers, safe place to sleep, those take investment. And in most cases, it's not charity investment. It's investment by governments, investments to build the infrastructure, to give access. That's the only way you're going to get people out of poverty. And America's done a great job. But we still have kids sleeping on the streets, and we have soldiers coming back from Afghanistan where you went that are sleeping on the streets. So we still have programs, and they're not going to be solved by charity hand-downs. They're going to be solved by investment of federal and state and local money. I've done 30, I was just looking at it, this is my 36th budget in elective office. 17 of those were in local government and state government. Never did we balance the state or local government without some additional revenues. I think if you're only looking at cut, squeeze, and trim, you're not going to solve the problem.
I'm blessed to come from a county that received the Broad Prize last year for the very best public education system in the nation, Gwinnett County, because we started investing in education when the feds weren't, and we started testing when the feds weren't, and we started measuring when the feds weren't. And so that brings us to this year when the Secretary of the Department of Education flies down to Georgia to learn from Gwinnett County what message he can bring back to help other schools perform better. You're absolutely right. There are no successes out there that don't take investment, and that will never be a topic of discussion in this appropriations process. The only discussion is, does that investment have to come out of Washington, D.C., or can we have better results with programs back home? And I think in the case of Gwinnett County, we absolutely have, and I appreciate both you gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This ag bill is always a difficult one because it has so many subsidies for farmers in it that distort markets and seem to be at a time when our deficits are getting worse and worse, and we're cutting other programs. I just have a hard time accepting these ongoing subsidy levels. It's hard to even unpack the subsidies, and sort of what line items they're on. I think they're mostly under farm programs and rural development, but maybe Mr. Kingston could address why the level of subsidies for farms that distort markets is so high in this appropriations bill.
Well, unfortunately, that gets back to the authorizing issue in which our hands are basically tied, and that's about 80% of the bill. As you may know, there were a couple of amendments that were added in full committee that dealt with some of the farm programs, and yet, because they're authorizing, we can't move forward with them. And so I think there's a lot of bipartisan frustration on traditional ag programs, which I think, by the way, is about $9 billion. There's another $9 billion of kind of, I would say, miscellaneous rural development type programs, which enjoy a good bipartisan support. They're not direct farm type things, but it is the jurisdiction of the authorizing committee, and they're locked into the 5 and 6 year cycle on it.
So you're saying some of those are under mandatory programs?
Absolutely, I think they all are.
There's some items under the discretionary, like the farm programs, Ag Credit and Subsidies Administration, Ag Credit loans, a couple line items that say things along the lines of rural business subsidies. So those might fall under that category as well.
Well, I think those subsidies support the loan levels, and I believe that in that case they're not subsidies.
The loan line item are not as much a concern as the money that's going out. I would also argue, and I believe that a lot of so we have the Child Nutrition Program, Commodity Credit Corporation. Are many of these programs then forced to buy certain product at a higher price than they would on the free international market?
Well, I think there might be some discussion on that. As the gentleman may know, that we have a cargo preference rule when given foreign aid. I don't know Mr. McGovern's familiar with it, that it has to be shipped on American flag vessels. The argument behind that is that it keeps the merchant marine healthy, and the merchant marine is, who transfers our equipment during the time of war.
That wouldn't be a line item on here, though. that would be a separate,
It's actually discretionary money. It's not a line item, but it is
Yeah.
built into some of these program PL 480. And that, depending on who you talk to, that is cumbersome.
well, hopefully there will be able to be some floor amendments that can further reduce some of the subsidies and make sure that, money is directed towards those who, who need it the most
Well-
and or to reduce our deficit.
If the gentleman will yield,
Yes.
one of the awkward things is the World Trade Organization found America guilty of unfairly subsidizing American cotton producers. And the agreement, which was agreed to by President Obama, was to pay the Brazilian cotton farmers $147 million. Now, Ron Kind, during the CR, offered an amendment to delete that. Jeff Flake and Rosa DeLauro basically did in full committee. But again, it gets into authorizing, and then I'm in an awkward position of vote no on it. It is very hard to explain back home, but it is an international settlement in which America is obligated to fulfill.
Okay, I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Mr. Kingston, good to see you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. A couple questions for you. When you look at the WIC part of this overall appropriations bill, I noticed that they've had about a 26% increase in participation over the last 10 years, and yet the administrative costs have gone up about 72%. And so we hear a lot of conversation around the recipients of WIC, but what we seem to be lacking is some oversight over the administrative responsibilities of distributing the resources. When you look at the fact that the WIC administration arm has administrative costs that exceed 40%.
Well, the gentleman,
If you were not,
it's not true.
no, sir. If you were a nonprofit organization reporting federally, if you're over 25%, you find yourself under some federal scrutiny. But according to the appropriations bill, page 43 and 44, it looks like the WIC administrative cost exceeds 40%. What's your thoughts on?
We actually had a very spirited debate in full committee about that. Mrs. DeLore, Mr. Farr, and a number of members arguing that it's actually a 9% overhead. We quoted directly that 40% figure from the USDA and cited the author of the report on it. And I agreed after the committee that we would sit down and look at what the administrative costs are. For those who believe that it's 9%, I understand there's going to be an amendment to say no WIC administration costs will be paid over 10%, and they'll have an opportunity to say, yeah, we're going to stand behind that because 9% is the level. But there are those who believe strongly it's 9%, and as I said, that report said it was 40%. We do want to huddle together because I'm concerned that there is high overhead, and that you can always do it a little bit better,
Right.
even if it's
9%.
That's right, and so we want to take a look at that. Okay. And right now, 49% of the children in America are on WIC, of eligible children.
Yes.
And so to me, are there that many poor people, or is it being aggressively marketing? WIC is an absolute sacred cow. Politically, and we understand that, and so it's very difficult. But you may know last year the administration cut WIC funding $562 million to take the money out, by the way, to pay for a legal settlement that had nothing to do with school nutrition or child nutrition at all. And many of the people who are screaming that we're cutting WIC were quite silent when that $562 million was cut out of it.
The second, my final point is, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen about an 84% increase in discretionary spending. I'd love to know what the base budget for this program was in 2006.
Probably about $4 billion. I'll try to get that.
Okay, thank you.
Could the gentleman just yield for 1 second?
The discretionary,
Yeah.
it's been cut back in this bill back to below 2008 enacted level.
Okay. So I'd love to know what it was at 2006. I like to compare the numbers as it relates to what we're spending today versus what we spent 4 years ago, basically. And I'd also like to see the administrative cost over that same period of time. Because at the end of the day, I'd love to be able to have a narrative to go along with this debate that we're having about the end user when we're not having a discussion about the fact that we might be increasing the layers of fat in the administrative costs, which then reduces the number of recipients that are even, or funds available for recipients.
Well, 2 points on that. One, if you look on page 103 of the, it breaks down the administrative costs of the report language. There's the breastfeeding support. This is an educational program. There's nutritional education, and those are included in what you might consider administrative costs. There's other client services and program management. The overall program management is what Mr. Kingston said. It's 9%. But, I think it's very interesting in trying to cut this back. But we don't do that in our own budget. You don't do that in your household bills because your lighting bill's gone up, your water bill's gone up, your garbage bill's gone up, your TV cable bill's gone up.
I reclaim my time.
Thank you.
Here's my question to you, Mr. Kingston. I'd love to see if there's a disparity between 40% plus and 9%. I'd love to see that disparity cleared up, number one. Number two, I'd still, no, not at this point. I'd still like to see the administrative analysis of what it is versus where it goes. And it's a very important part of the conversation that we continue to overlook.
I agree with you. One of the frustrations I have is when it comes time, and I think Mr. Paulus has raised some points on farm programs. And, we as Democrats and Republicans should take a good look at it. But I think nutrition and military spending, Mr. Governor, and I voted for the Kucinich amendment. I feel very
You didn't vote for the
concerned
McGovern amendment, though, did you?
I did not, but I thought about it. And actually, is the gentleman, I think you're true on the military spending, and I think that's very important. But I also want you to know I voted against Kucinich because I have a lot of concerns of where our money's going. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that we should be okay with putting the administrative cost and the fraud and the abuse on nutrition programs on the table. And I think it's also okay to talk about, is it 3 meals a day or 5 meals a day? Because, again, for every dollar we're spending, 40 cents is borrowed, so shouldn't we know? And maybe we come up with, no, you know what? We want to feed that child 3.5 meals a day, period. And, maybe it needs to be 5 meals a day. But when there is a lot of overlap in these programs, we ought to be able to discuss it like adults and figure out, okay, is this the best way it should be done? And maybe the current program is perfect. But I don't think it is, and I think there's some flaws in it that we owe to our tax payers back home to address. And I really appreciate your question.
Just for 5 seconds, again, I want to reemphasize what Mr. Farr said. On page 103 in the dissenting views, it really points out what a distortion it is to say that 40% of WIC's costs are administrative costs. Again, WIC does a lot of things, but included in what you say is administrative costs, again, breastfeeding support, nutrition education, other client services. WIC does many things, and to characterize that as just overhead is just wrong. And that's why some of us who are defenders of WIC are so kind of outraged that 40% is in your report. And I hope we can fix that on the floor.
The gentleman knows, though, that did come from ERS, the Ag.
But also
it comes from USDA, but it quotes USDA directly.
Then
the problem
let me
isn't
reclaim
with
my
our
time.
committee. The problem is with USDA.
Let me reclaim my time. Congressmember Kingston, I would really like to see the delineation. Mr. McGovern, there certainly cannot be the kind of disparity that goes from 40% to 9%.
Yield, then I'm wondering if the gentleman would be okay with an amendment that says no funding above 9% for administrative costs, if we're really serious about that. And I suspect there would be a lot of people who would scream and holler. But if it's 9%, then it should be fine to have that amendment on the floor.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce my sixth-born child, my youngest daughter, Victoria, who's here with me. She's just watching her dad. I also would like to congratulate the gentleman from Dallas on beating the NBA's New York Yankees from Miami, our team, Florida, with a great effort, and I thought that was pretty awesome. I do have a couple of questions about the bill, but I'll ask them after the meeting.
let me just say that Mr. Sessions and I were just in a meeting, and we found that the greatest celebrants were obviously those in Dallas, but the second level of celebration came from those in Cleveland, Ohio, for obvious reasons. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here, and we look forward to obviously a free-flowing and interesting debate on the House floor. That'll conclude the hearing portion for consideration of H.R. 2112. The Chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move the committee grant H.R. 2112, the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration and Related Agency Appropriations Act 2012, an open rule. The rule provides for 1 hour of general debate on the bill equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member on the Committee on Appropriations. Waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule waives points of order against provisions in the bill for failure to comply with Clause 2 of Rule 21, except for Sections 740, 741, 743, and 744. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The rule authorizes the Chair to accord priority and recognition to members who have pre-printed their amendments in the congressional record. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any discussion or amendment? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the language in the rule which exposes Sections 741 and 743 of the bill to points of order. These sections address payments to the Brazilian Cotton Institute. And just so I can be clear for my colleagues, if you vote against my amendment, what you're voting for is to cut WIC even further and send that money to the Brazilian Cotton Institute. And so that's what this amendment is about.
Thanks for making that so clear. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No.
As for record,
no. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions.
No.
Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. No. Mr. Webster, no. Mr. Reed. No. Mr. Reed, no. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk,
no.
report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Mavericks. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Madam Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And this will be managed on the floor by the gentleman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina. And Mr. McGovern, thank you all very much. And we'll let you know when we're going to have our next meeting. Committee stands adjourned.